Hello, thank you for tuning into my channel. We're working on designing a quilt today, so if you want to know how to create your own Bargello quilt out of graph paper, please stay tuned. The idea for designing a Bargello quilt and making a video about how to design it actually came from some questions I got on my channel, and I want to thank the people who gave me that idea. I'll put your name somewhere in the video so that we can see who you are. I really appreciate you giving me this idea. I think it's a great topic to talk about because even though there are a lot of patterns out there for Bargello, there are books and individual patterns that you can purchase. I think it means a lot if you can design your own quilt. If you've been following my channel, you know that there have been 2 quilts that I've designed on the channel that were Bargello. So I'm going to talk about the approach that I take for each of those types of quilts because it was pretty different for each one. There are programs I think that you can use, like computer programs that you can use to design quilts. I don't have any of those programs, so I design my quilts on paper. And right now I use a lot of, I use crayons or color pencils or something like that. And I'll show a couple of them that I've done when I was doing chevron quilts. This is one of the ones that I made. It says Baby Making Blanket, and I designed it with just paper and color pencils. This one is, I just drew out a small design that I could color in. This is the Georgia block, and I have a couple videos about that quilt as well. I've drawn out so many designs. These are 2 half square triangles that have not even been made yet, but I drew them out, and hopefully I'll be making one of those soon. This one is what I call the Argyle quilt, and I drew it all out and figured out all the fabric, and I've already made that. I made it several years ago. So there are lots of different ways that you can design quilts. I usually take, this is just a sheet of graph paper that I made on the computer. Okay, and so just something simple like this, I just made a table and put as many squares as I wanted in it, and then when I got the size I wanted, I just clicked the whole table and had the computer adjust the size so that they were all the same size. So starting with something as simple as this can be a great way to design a quilt like this. But since my question was specifically about the Bargello quilt, that's what I'm going to spend most of my focus on. As I said before, there are 2 quilts that we're going to talk about. First, we're going to talk about the Baby Bargello quilt. So I want to lay it out first, and then I'll show you the process that I use to make it. So this Bargello quilt was the first one that I made using the Bargello technique. And there are times when your fabric will dictate how you will create the quilt. So in this case, it started with a Moda scrap bag. I have another video from making this quilt that I'll put a link to in the description box and in one of the cards. It's called the Baby Bargello. And what I did is I started with the Moda scrap bag, and I only got 39 fabrics, and they were 3 inches wide, but only about 30 inches long. So I started with that. I decided to put my strips into 3 groups, and so you can see right here in each of the sections, there are actually 3 sections joined together, so you can kind of see where the fabrics change, but the color stayed consistent throughout. What I did was for this one I put the darkest strip in the middle, and then I fanned out the colors around it. You might choose, if you wanted to go from darkest color to lightest color to create your Bargello. I just like to start with the dark in the middle and fan out from there. I made my 3 strip sets, and then I had to come up with a way that I would stitch them together. So again, in this case, the fabric determined the placement, But I am going to show you, I did make a little chart to help with putting this quilt together. So I want to show you the chart that I came up with. And there are a few little basic things about Bargello. If you keep the segments that you cut, if you keep them the same size, the pattern becomes very linear. So it'll be kind of strict angles and things like that. In this case, we have a little bit of a curve because the strip sets that I cut into strip units are different widths. So I'm going to show you that on the graph that I came up with. So let's talk about designing the Bargello. In this case, what I had was an idea in mind, and then I needed to figure out how I was going to put that idea onto the fabric. What I started with was a basic shape, and so I'm going to just kind of draw a shape here with a marker. Usually when I'm designing a Bargello, I am using, or any quilt, I like to use paper and I use color pencils. So these are some colored pencils, and I try to keep a pencil sharpener in there just in case something is not sharp enough, because if you're using filling in small spaces, you want that pencil to be as sharp as you can get it. Okay, so this is just an example of the design that I wanted. If you want a particular shape, kind of have that shape in your brain. For the heartbeat quilt here, I had the shape of like an EKG, so like the shape of a heartbeat. Let me see if I can draw that here. So where it goes kind of steep up and then gradually down, and kind of steep up and gradually down. So something like this would be the shape that I'm going for. And so the trick was to try to get it to work on the graph paper. What I did was I took I made several attempts at the shape, and what I just used a pen, and I just kind of drew the shape that I thought I wanted. For this one, I thought I wanted the blocks to go like halfway, kind of like a trip around the world, but this shape didn't really appeal to me. I also tried this shape, and this is when I thought that the colors of the quilt were going to be blue before my son changed his mind. And I even tried something like this just to see if that might work, but it ended up not working. I also have several attempts, see, something like this, where I blocked off varying numbers of blocks to get the shape, to try to get the shape, and to create these gradual curves. I went from a kind of wide width to the narrower width, and that's what makes that gradual curve. And then to get a linear, you can see that all these are the same size. So there are lots of different variations. Here's one, because I wanted the curve to go up. That's the first thing I wanted to see on the quilt. Okay, and then here's one, and like I feel like this was probably almost the one, but I ended up making mine a little bit lower. So this is what we actually got. So that it goes gradually up and then all the way down and up and down. Okay, so you can see that it took several attempts. It took me a while to get the shape that I wanted, but once I got it, I really felt like it worked for me. So what I did, once I had, actually even before I had the shape, I chose my colors first, because you really want to think about how you're going to make these colors work together. And I decided that I was going to use 8 colors in all. Oh, it's upside down. And I used the colored pencil to try to figure out kind of the order that I wanted, because you really want to make sure that whatever you use is going to have a nice blend. And I labeled under the colors, I labeled them so that I knew which color was going to come where in the pattern. And when I sat down to color it, after I knew my order, I think I ended up starting with the part that I drew out. That ended up being my color 1. So the darkest green, that's the one that makes the pattern here. And then mine happened to have a black that made the pattern as well. So once you decide how you want to work the pattern, I would go ahead and draw it in. What I did was, this one looks a little bit different from my quilt, but each of these squares, I let that be 1 inch so that I had a consistent measurement. And so you can see some of these are as wide as 2.5 squares, and some of them are as narrow as half a square. And so if you use that block as a 1 inch, I think it'll give you a pretty good idea of the design. My strips going across ended up being 2.5 inches. So this quilt ended up being taller and skinnier, but this gave me a good idea of like the amount of fabric that I would need. I could figure it out from this diagram. So it worked out really well for me. And let's see, after you color it, what I did was I had to figure out the amount of, like, the number of repeats. So I ended up counting up so that I got 3 repeats out of the 14. So I got 3 sets of 14. And so I counted up until I had all 3 sets, and it ended up being, let's see, 14 times 3, 72. Is that right? No, 52. So 52 tall, and so I just stopped it right there since I was using the 14 strip sets. So this way I kind of had the number in mind that I wanted. So in closing, in summary, I took first, figure out your colors and how you want to use them. Okay, so I ended up using, I did colors 1 through 8, and then I put them back in reverse order. So if that's what you're going to do, you need to know that ahead of time. However, now that I'm making another one of these Bargello quilts, I'm actually using 14 completely different fabrics. So I know that it's going to look different just by nature of the design. I know that the design is going to look different on a different quilt. Okay, so once you decide your colors and you figure out your shape, start filling them in. Again, if you want to make a gentle curve, you will go from the larger size to the smaller size gradually. If you want to make a very linear or a steep curve or steep incline, you make them all the same to create that linear shape. Once you have it drawn, you want to figure out the repeats. So if you need to make 3 sets of 14 fabrics, you can do that. Or if you want to do, like, even if you wanted to do 10 sets of 3 or something like that, you just need to know the repeats so you can, so it'll help with making your strip sets. And from there, like from this point, I figured out how much fabric I was going to need, remembering that for me, each of these was 1 inch. So you can make your scale whatever you want it to be. In my case, it was 1 inch. So after you've done that, I did end up putting my fabrics in order, and I prepared a cutting guide so I knew where to cut each strip. In this case, this is also on my pattern that's on my Etsy shop, so if you're interested in that, that's on the Etsy shop, and I have it listed by cut and by which strips are going to be cut in between. So that's all for this video. If you have any more questions, please leave them in the comments below. I can't wait to read them. And let me know, if you're planning on doing a Bargello quilt, are you going to design it yourself or are you going to use a pre-made pattern? Either option is fine. Thumbs up this video, share it with your friends, and I'll see you next time.